You have heard the word Cajun your entire life. On a hot sauce bottle, a bag of seasoning, a roadside sign for boudin and cracklins somewhere in South Louisiana. You probably picture French. French settlers, French food, French words bent into a Bayou accent. So here is a question almost nobody stops to ask. If Cajuns are French, why are so many of them named Schexnayder and Romero and Stelly? Why do German and Spanish last names sit on top of a French identity like they have always belonged there? The answer is hiding in Cajun DNA, and it quietly turns the whole idea of a Cajun bloodline inside out. To see how that works, you have to start with a pot. Anybody who has spent time in South Louisiana knows that a gumbo does not come from a recipe so much as a habit. You start with the dark roux, the French base, the thing that makes it a gumbo at all. Then everything else goes in, whatever the week handed you. Sausage from the German butcher up the bayou, Spanish peppers, okra that came across on a slave ship, shrimp that a cousin pulled out of the Gulf that morning. An hour later, it is all one pot, one flavor, and you call the whole thing gumbo. Nobody stands over the bowl announcing which spoonful is German and which is African. It is gumbo. The pot took everything in and gave it a single name. And notice what the pot does not do. It does not rank the ingredients. The okra does not get an asterisk for being African. The sausage does not get demoted for being German. Once it is in the gumbo, it is gumbo, equally and completely. That refusal to rank is the whole trick, and it is exactly how the Cajun name behaved with people. Here is the simple version of what happened to the Cajun people. The version a curious 12-year-old can hold on to. A name can work exactly like that pot. You start with one group, give them a strong enough identity, a language, a faith, a way of cooking and marrying and burying their dead, and that identity becomes a pot. Other people fall in. They marry in, settle in, hide in. And within a generation or two, the children all answer to the one name on the side of the pot. The Cajuns did not stay a sealed French bloodline. They became a pot with French writing on it, and almost everyone who wandered into South Louisiana eventually ended up inside. Now the real version. And it starts with one of the cruelest chapters in colonial history. The people we call Cajuns began as Acadians, French farmers who settled the maritime corner of Canada, a place they called Acadie back in the early 1600s. They were French, deeply and specifically French, most of them tracing to the west-central part of the country. Then, in 1755, the British, who now controlled the region, decided the Acadians were a problem. They rounded them up, burned the farms, loaded families onto ships, and scattered them down the Atlantic coast and across the sea. It is remembered as the Grand Dérangement, the Great Upheaval. Thousands died. The survivors drifted for years, and starting in the 1760s, many of them found their way to Spanish-controlled Louisiana, settling along the bayous Lafourche, Tech, and Vermilion. The scattering is the part that matters genetically. Families were split across the ships on purpose, so the survivors, who eventually regrouped in Louisiana, were a small, battered remnant of what Acadie had been. A small, founding group, marrying mostly among themselves in a new and isolated place, is the exact recipe for what scientists call a founder population. Few founders, heavy intermarriage, then a population boom. Whatever genes that remnant happened to carry got amplified, copied into generation after generation, until traits that were rare back in France became common on the bayou. And here's the strange thing the DNA proves about that French core. It is real, and it is tight. When a population starts from a small, intermarried group of survivors, it carries a sharp genetic fingerprint, and you can read it in the diseases that cluster there. Cajuns are what geneticists call a founder population, and they carry several inherited conditions at unusually high rates, including Tay-Sachs and a form of Usher syndrome. In the early 1990s, researchers studying Cajun families with Tay-Sachs found something remarkable. Many of the carriers traced back to a single ancestral couple from France, one pair of people whose genetic legacy was still surfacing in Louisiana children more than 2 centuries later. One couple. That is how concentrated the French founding spine of the Cajun people actually is. And Tay-Sachs is not the only signature. Cajun and Acadian families also carry an unusually high rate of a form of Usher syndrome, an inherited condition that affects both hearing and sight, and it follows the same founder pattern, a few original carriers whose mutation rode the population boom. Doctors in South Louisiana learned to watch for these conditions in a way doctors elsewhere never had to. precisely because the Cajun gene pool started so small and stayed so tightly connected. The diseases are a tragedy. They are also a kind of receipt. They prove the French founding group was real, that it was small, and that it stayed bound together for a very long time. So the French part is not a myth. It is written into the bodies of Cajun families so plainly that a single 18th century couple still leaves a mark today. But hold that thought, because the founding spine is only half the genome. The other half is everyone the pot swallowed. Because the Acadians did not land in an empty place, Louisiana in the 1700s was already a gumbo. There was a whole stretch of river upstream called the German coast, settled by German immigrants who had arrived to farm for the French crown. There were Spanish colonists and soldiers, since Spain ran the colony for decades. There were enslaved and free Africans whose labor and cooking and music were everywhere. And there were native nations, the Homa, the Chitimacha, who had lived on that water for thousands of years. The Acadians moved in among all of them, and then they did the most ordinary human thing in the world. They married the neighbors. You can read the marriages right off the mailboxes. That German coast is where Cajun names like Heimel, Schexnayder, and Stelly come from. They are German names, smoothed out and Frenchified over the generations, until the families carrying them spoke Cajun French and would have been insulted to be called anything but Cajun. The Spanish left the same way, in names like Romero, Miguez, and Segura. Each one is a person who fell into the pot and came out Cajun. From a few thousand scattered Acadian survivors, the Cajun people grew to more than 500,000, and they did not grow that big by Acadians alone having enormous families. They grew that big by absorption. What held all of this together was the glue, and the glue was culture. A German farmer who married a Cajun girl did not keep speaking German at the dinner table. The household ran on Cajun French, on Catholic feast days, on the same boats and the same pot of gumbo, and the children grew up inside all of that, not beside it. Language did the absorbing. So did the church, and the dance hall, and the kitchen. Within a single generation, the German grandfather was just a story, and the grandchildren were Cajun in every way the Bayou knew how to measure, in the words they prayed in, and the music they danced to, and the pot they stirred on a Sunday afternoon. If you're finding this helpful, hit subscribe to Beyond the Swab. I break down what your DNA actually reveals every single week. Now, here is where the two halves of the genome finally collide. We tend to treat ethnicity like a bloodline, a thing you either are or are not, passed down pure or watered down. Cajun DNA refuses to behave that way, and it refuses in a fascinating direction. A single Cajun person can carry a French founder mutation that traces to one couple in Old Acadie, and a German surname from the river, and a thread of Spanish ancestry, and often a quiet line of Native American or African ancestry that the family may or may not talk about. All of it in one body. All of it answering to one word: Cajun. That is the twist the name hides. Cajun was never a race. It was never a sealed bloodline waiting to be diluted. It was a culture so strong, so confident in its language and its food and its faith, that it could swallow a German farmer, a Spanish soldier, and a bayou full of other people, and turn their grandchildren into Cajuns, without anyone feeling like anything had been lost. The French spine stayed strong enough to leave founder diseases in the blood. The Cajun body grew wide enough to hold 500,000 people with last names from 3 other countries. Both things are true at once, and the DNA shows both at once. And the absorption never really stopped at Germans and Spaniards. Tucked into many Cajun family trees is a quiet line of Native American ancestry, from the Homa and the Chitimacha, who shared that water for thousands of years, and sometimes a line of African ancestry that the racial laws of the Old South pressured families to bury and never mention. The pot took those in too. A full Cajun genome is often a small map of nearly everyone who ever lived on those bayous, the whole crowded history of South Louisiana, all of it filed under one French-sounding word, which means the question we started with had the wrong shape. It was never how can a Cajun be named Schexnayder. It was always, what kind of identity is powerful enough to make a Schexnayder a Cajun? The answer is the kind that comes out of a pot. You do not ask a gumbo to prove its bloodline. You taste it, and you know exactly what it is. So the next time you see that word on a bottle or a bayou sign, remember what is actually underneath it. Not a pure French remnant clinging to the swamp. a 200-year-old act of absorption, a French roux that took in everything Louisiana threw at it and gave it all a single, stubborn, unmistakable name. The Cajuns were never what we thought, because we thought Cajun was a bloodline. It was a pot. And maybe that is the part worth arguing about. A lot of people guard Cajun identity like a bloodline, like there is a real Cajun and a fake one, a pure strain that needs protecting. The DNA says the opposite. The most authentically Cajun thing a family can be is mixed, because the mixing is the entire history. Purity is the one thing a gumbo has never once been. If your family came up Cajun, tell me the one last name everybody assumes is French but absolutely is not. Just the one name,